Do not move. The scientist whispered into the comm channel. The most dangerous creature on this planet is looking directly at the human, and it is afraid. For 30 seconds, nobody on the observation deck breathed. The Karuan was not supposed to hesitate. It was the apex predator of Vesper, 9, a creature that had survived environments that drove other species away. It had been studied for decades, admired by hunters, feared by explorers, and considered the ultimate example of natural dominance. Yet now, standing 50 yards away from a single human technician, the Karuan slowly stepped backward. Dr. Lyra Vey stared at the monitor, unable to understand what she was seeing. "Run the recording again," she said quietly. The technician beside her looked confused. "Doctor, we already checked it 6 times. Then check it a 7th. The screen replayed the moment. The human stood beside a damaged power station, one hand holding a worn tool, the other resting at his side. He was not making a threat. He was not challenging the creature. He was simply looking at it. The human's name was Jack Reynolds, 38 years old, former rescue specialist, current maintenance worker for a remote research outpost that most civilizations had forgotten existed. To the Avarian scientists watching from their hidden observation room, he looked ordinary. No armor, no advanced weaponry, no enhanced biology. Just a human in a gray utility jacket, standing alone on a cold alien world. "That makes no sense," Lyra said. "The Karuan has never retreated from anything." She pulled up the creature's historical records. Hundreds of encounters appeared across the screen. The Karuan had faced massive creatures, armored species, and advanced hunting machines. It had never shown uncertainty. But with Jack Reynolds, something changed. Maybe the human attacked it before the recording started, another scientist suggested. Lyra shook her head. "No," she zoomed in on the footage. "Look at his posture." The others leaned closer. "He is not preparing to fight. He is waiting." That detail bothered her more than anything else. Every species in the galaxy reacted to predators the same way. They created distance. They showed fear. They searched for safety. But the human did something different. He watched. He studied. He remained calm. Outside the research station, Jack had already returned to repairing the damaged generator. He did not know he was being observed. He did not know that a legendary predator had just changed direction because of him. To Jack, it was just another day on a difficult assignment. The equipment was old. The weather was unpredictable. The nearest settlement was 200 miles away. Problems were expected. Panic was not useful. He tightened a loose connection and looked across the empty landscape. "You can come closer if you want," he said calmly. Lyra froze when she heard his voice through the external microphone. The Karuan stopped moving. Jack glanced toward the distant rocks, then returned to his work. "I know you're there." For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy's greatest predator faced a choice. And somehow, the creature decided that walking away was the safer option. Lyra watched the screen in silence. She had spent her entire career studying predators. She thought she understood fear. But now she had one question that refused to leave her mind. What had the Karuan seen when it looked into the eyes of a human? The first thing Jack Reynolds did every morning on Vesper 9 was check the weather system before he checked his own schedule. The planet had a habit of changing its mind without warning. 1 hour could bring clear skies, and the next could turn the entire valley into a freezing white storm. Jack had learned a long time ago that surviving a difficult place was not about being stronger than everything around you. It was about paying attention. That was something Dr. Lyra Vey noticed immediately. She watched from the research station as Jack moved through his routine with a strange kind of patience. He inspected the generator, reviewed the pressure readings, and made small adjustments that most people would have ignored. "He acts like he has done this his entire life," one of the scientists said. Lyra kept her eyes on the screen. "Maybe he has." She pulled up Jack's background information. The file was surprisingly simple. Human male. Born in Colorado. Former rescue specialist. 6 years with the United Earth Exploration Corps. Current assignment. Remote infrastructure support. Nothing about him suggested danger. Nothing explained why a legendary predator had chosen to retreat. "There has to be something missing," Lyra said. The scientist beside her looked at the data. "The human records are complete." "No," she replied. "The records are complete. That is not the same thing." Outside the station, Jack finished repairing the damaged power unit and sat on an old metal container near the landing pad. He opened a small thermos and took a drink of coffee that had clearly been made several hours earlier. It was not good coffee. Even he knew that. But after years in remote locations, expectations changed. A warm drink was a warm drink. He looked across the valley where the Karuan had disappeared. Most people would have been nervous knowing a predator was nearby. Jack was careful, but he was not afraid. There was a difference. "You really are strange," Lyra said over the communication channel. Jack looked up. He had forgotten the research team could contact him directly. That is usually what people say when they do not know what else to say. Lyra paused. "You knew it was watching you." Jack looked toward the hills. "Yes." "How?" "The birds stopped making noise." Lyra looked confused. "The birds." "Small animals notice things before people do." His answer was so simple that it almost frustrated her. She expected a secret technique, a hidden weapon, some advanced human technology. Instead, she got an observation anyone could have missed. Lyra studied the footage again. "You were not trying to scare it away." Jack shook his head. "No. You were not trying to fight it." "No, then what were you doing?" Jack looked back at the mountains, trying to understand what it wanted. That answer stayed with her, because it was not the answer of a warrior. It was the answer of someone who had spent a long time around dangerous things and learned that fear often made situations worse. Later that evening, Lyra reviewed the Karuan data alone. She compared its behavior with every recorded encounter. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The creature had not reacted to aggression. It had reacted to recognition, as if it had seen something familiar in Jack, something from a memory buried deep inside its instincts. For the first time in her career, Lyra was not studying a predator. She was studying the reason a predator decided not to hunt. And somewhere outside the station walls, Jack Reynolds continued repairing equipment, completely unaware that an entire alien civilization was beginning to question what humanity truly was. For the first time in 20 years of research, Dr. Lyra Vey found herself unable to explain what she was seeing. The Karuan was not afraid of the human. It was remembering something. That was the only conclusion that made sense. She spent the entire night reviewing every record connected to the creature, searching through old expedition reports, survival studies, and forgotten encounters from distant worlds. The answer was buried somewhere. She knew it. "You are still looking at the same data?" her assistant asked when he entered the research room. Lyra did not look away from the screen. "Because I know I am missing something." The assistant placed a tablet beside her. "Maybe the human is just unusual." Lyra finally turned around. "No. Unusual does not make an apex predator retreat." She pointed at the screen. "A frightened animal runs because it does not understand danger. This creature understands danger better than any species we have studied." It made a decision. Outside the station, Jack Reynolds was repairing another section of the power system. The morning temperature had dropped below freezing, and the wind moved across the valley like a constant warning. Jack tightened a connector, checked the readings, and quietly shook his head. "Still fighting me," he muttered to the machine. He smiled slightly. It reminded him of old equipment back on Earth. Machines were honest. If something was wrong, they showed you. People were usually more complicated. His communication device activated. "Jack, this is Lyra." He picked it up. "Good morning, Doctor. You are aware there is a Karuan in your area?" Jack looked toward the hills. "Yes." "And you are not concerned?" Jack thought about the question for a moment. "Concerned?" "Yes." "Worried?" "Not really." Lyra frowned. "Those are different things. Very different." Jack placed his tools down. "Concern helps you make good decisions. Panic makes decisions for you." That answer stayed quiet in Lyra's mind. She had heard countless military commanders, explorers, and scientists speak about survival, most focused on strength, technology, or preparation. Jack spoke about control. "You spent years in rescue operations," Lyra said. "Did you encounter creatures like this before?" Jack looked away for a moment. It was the first time she noticed a change in his expression. Not fear. Not sadness. Something older. Not exactly. What does that mean? It means every dangerous place has something that thinks it owns the environment. He picked up his tools again. "Usually it does." Lyra studied him carefully. "Usually?" Jack nodded. "Until it meets something that learned how to survive there." The communication channel went silent. Those words bothered her because Jack did not say them with pride. There was no arrogance in his voice. No desire to prove humanity was superior. He said it like someone describing a simple fact. Later that day, Lyra requested access to restricted human exploration records. The request was denied immediately. Reason: classified survival history. That alone caught her attention. A species with nothing to hide would not lock away its past. She returned to the observation room and watched Jack through the cameras. He was eating a simple meal beside the generator, completely unaware of the questions surrounding him. Behind him, far beyond the station lights, two glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. The Karuan had returned. Lyra held her breath. This time, she wanted to see what happened when the creature came closer. Not because she expected an attack, because she needed to understand the impossible truth. What had a predator at the top of the galaxy's food chain discovered about humanity that humans themselves rarely talked about? The Karuan did not move. For nearly 3 minutes, the creature stood at the edge of the valley, watching Jack Reynolds work beneath the fading light of Vesper 9. Dr. Lyra Vey watched from the observation room, her eyes fixed on the screen. She had expected curiosity. She had expected tension. She had expected the human to finally show fear. Instead, Jack continued repairing the generator as if a legendary predator was nothing more than another problem waiting to be solved. "He knows it is there," Lyra whispered. Her assistant looked at the monitor. "How can you be certain?" "Because he stopped looking for it." The assistant frowned. "That does not make sense." Lyra nodded slowly. "Exactly." Outside, Jack placed the final component into the generator housing and checked the power readings. The machine responded with a low hum, bringing another section of the research station back online. He wiped his hands on his jacket and looked toward the distant hills. "You can stop hiding now," Jack said. Lyra immediately leaned closer to the audio feed. The Karuan did not understand human language, but the creature reacted anyway. It lowered its head slightly, not like an animal preparing to attack, like something trying to understand. "Jack?" Lyra said through the communication channel. "Why did you say that?" Jack looked up toward the station camera. "Because it has been watching me for 2 days." Silence filled the observation room. 2 days, Lyra repeated. "You knew?" "Yes." "And you did not report it?" Jack looked confused. "I did not think it was necessary." Lyra almost laughed from disbelief. "A Karuan was observing your location, and you decided it was not necessary?" Jack shrugged. It was not approaching. It was not interfering. It was learning. That answer bothered her more than anything else. Jack was not ignoring danger. He was reading it. The difference was subtle, but it changed everything. "How do you know what it is doing?" Lyra asked. Jack looked back at the valley. "Because I used to do the same thing." "You studied predators?" "No," he paused. "I studied situations." For the first time, Lyra noticed the way Jack carried himself. The careful movements. The constant awareness. The way he always knew where the exits were, where the equipment was stored, and what sounds did not belong. She had mistaken his calmness for simplicity. It was not simplicity. It was experience. Later that evening, Lyra finally received access to part of Jack's old service record. Most of it remained restricted, but one line was available. Human Rescue Division. Extreme Environment Operations. Survival Classification, Exceptional. She read the words several times. "Exceptional survival," she said quietly. "That is not a normal classification." Her assistant looked over her shoulder. "Maybe humans are just more resilient than we expected." Lyra shook her head. "No. Resilience is surviving something difficult." She looked back at Jack's image on the screen. "This is something else." Outside, Jack sat near the generator, looking at the stars above the alien world. The Karuan remained nearby, no longer hidden. Two creatures from completely different worlds sat in the same silence. Neither moved closer. Neither walked away. And for the first time, Lyra wondered if the predator was not afraid of Jack at all. Maybe it recognized him. Maybe somewhere in its ancient memory, it had already learned one simple truth. Some creatures do not survive because they are the strongest. They survive because they refuse to stop adapting. Lyra Vey had spent most of her life studying creatures that survived because they were stronger than everything around them. She had documented hunters with extraordinary senses, species with natural defenses, and predators that had adapted to worlds where most life could not exist. But Jack Reynolds was different. The more she watched him, the less she understood him. He did not look like a threat. He looked like a man trying to finish a difficult job before the end of the day. That was what bothered her. On Vesper 9, every creature had a reason for every movement. The Karuan moved because it hunted. It watched because it searched for weakness. Yet Jack moved as if he had already accepted the presence of danger and simply continued living. The next morning, Lyra walked outside the research station and approached the human directly. The cold wind moved across the valley, carrying dust and ice crystals through the air. Jack was kneeling beside a damaged water filtration unit, working with the same patients she had seen every day. You realize most scientists would prefer observing a legendary predator from a safe distance, Lyra said. Jack looked up and gave a small smile. Most maintenance workers would prefer not having one watch them while they work. Lyra looked toward the hills. So you admit you know it is there? Of course. Her expression changed. And you are not afraid? Jack placed a tool on the ground and thought about the question. I did not say that. That answer caught her attention. You are afraid? Jack nodded. Everyone is afraid of something. He looked back at the valley. The difference is what you do after you feel it. Lyra stayed quiet. She expected humans to describe courage as confidence, as a lack of fear. Instead, Jack described it as a choice. When I was younger, I thought being brave meant not being scared, Jack said. Then I worked in places where fear was the only thing keeping people alive. What do you mean? Lyra asked. Jack adjusted the damaged filter system. Fear tells you to pay attention. It reminds you that something matters. He paused. But if fear makes every decision for you, you stop thinking. Those words stayed with Lyra. In her culture, survival was often connected to dominance. The strongest species controlled their environment. The most advanced civilizations shaped the galaxy around them. But Jack spoke about survival as something quieter, something earned. Your records mention extreme environment rescue missions, Lyra said. What happened during those missions? Jack looked at the ground for a moment. She noticed the change immediately. It was not sadness. It was memory. I learned something important, he finally said. The universe does not care if you are ready. Then how do you survive? Lyra asked. Jack looked at her. You learn. You adapt. You help the people beside you. A distant sound moved across the valley. The Karuan had returned. Lyra turned quickly, but Jack remained still. The creature stood near the edge of the rocks, watching them. For a moment, the entire valley became silent. Then the Karuan slowly stepped forward. Lyra expected Jack to move. He did not. Why are you not backing away? She whispered. Jack kept his eyes on the creature. Because it is not moving toward me as a threat. The Karuan stopped several yards away. Two completely different species stood in the same place, neither one trying to prove anything. Lyra watched in disbelief. She had spent years searching for the reason predators became dangerous. Now she was witnessing something she had never considered. Sometimes the most powerful thing a creature could do was remain calm when the entire universe expected it to run. For the first time since arriving on Vesper 9, Dr. Lyra Vey stopped thinking like a scientist and started thinking like a witness. She had spent years recording behavior, building theories, and explaining the natural world through facts and patterns. But what she saw between Jack Reynolds and the Karuan did not fit any of her previous research. The creature was not submitting. It was not afraid. It was recognizing something. Inside the research station, Lyra replayed the footage again and again. The same moment appeared every time. Jack stood still. The Karuan approached. Neither moved. Neither challenged the other. There has to be a reason, Lyra said quietly. Her assistant looked over the data. Maybe humans have a communication method we do not understand. Lyra shook her head. No. Communication requires intent. This was something older. She opened the Karuan archive and searched through thousands of recorded encounters. Most reports described the same pattern. Other species tried to avoid the creature. They built barriers. They created distance. They searched for ways to escape. The Karuan always recognized that reaction. It understood fear. It understood hesitation. But Jack Reynolds had shown neither. Outside, Jack was preparing another repair task near the station's outer equipment area. Lyra walked toward him with a tablet in her hand. I need to ask you something, she said. Jack looked up. That usually means I am about to learn something I do not like. Lyra almost smiled. Why did the Karuan stop? Jack considered the question. Maybe because I stopped. She frowned. That cannot be the entire answer. No, Jack admitted. It is not. He looked across the valley. Animals notice when you are trying to control them. Lyra listened carefully. And you were not trying to control it? No, then what were you doing? Jack looked at the distant hills where the Karuan had disappeared, giving it a chance to decide. The answer surprised her. In the history of the galaxy, most encounters between different species were based on power. One side tried to prove it was stronger. The other side tried to prove it was not weak. Jack was doing neither. He was allowing space. He was showing restraint. Your species is unusual, Lyra said. Jack laughed softly. You have no idea how often we hear that. She looked at him. You say that like it is not a compliment. Jack looked back at the generator. Sometimes being unusual is just another way of saying you learned things the hard way. Lyra noticed something in his voice. A lifetime of experiences hidden behind simple words. She wanted to ask more, but Jack changed the subject. The station power system is unstable. You should check the backup batteries before tonight. Lyra stared at him. You are changing the subject. Yes. Why? Jack gave a small shrug. Because the batteries still need checking. That simple answer stayed with her. Jack was not interested in being mysterious. He was not trying to create an image. He was simply focused on what needed to be done. Later that evening, Lyra accessed restricted human exploration records with special permission from the Research Council. She expected to find advanced weapons, secret technology, or some hidden advantage. Instead, she found reports about rescue missions, abandoned colonies, harsh environments, and humans surviving situations where survival seemed impossible. Page after page showed the same pattern. Humans entered difficult places. Humans adapted. Humans stayed when others left. Lyra finally understood why the Karuan had reacted differently. The creature was not seeing a stronger predator. It was seeing a survivor. And somewhere in its ancient instincts, it recognized that survivors were never easy to predict. The discovery changed everything for Dr. Lyra Vey. For years, she believed every species in the galaxy could be understood through one simple idea. Every creature wanted something. Territory, safety, control, survival. But Jack Reynolds had shown her something different. He did not survive because he was trying to dominate his environment. He survived because he understood it. The difference seemed small, but to Lyra, it changed the entire way she viewed humanity. The next morning, she presented her findings to the research team. The room was quiet as the Karuan footage played across the main display. The creature recognized him, Lyra said. One of the senior researchers looked uncertain. Recognized him as what? Lyra paused. She had spent hours trying to find the right words. Not as prey, not as a rival, as something familiar. A few scientists exchanged doubtful looks. That is impossible, one of them said. The Karuan is a natural hunter. It does not form emotional connections with unknown species. Lyra looked back at the screen. Maybe we have spent too much time studying what predators do and not enough time understanding why they do it. Meanwhile, Jack was repairing the communications tower outside the station. He worked slowly, checking each connection twice. Lyra approached him carrying her tablet. You realize you have become the most interesting person on this planet, she said. Jack looked over his shoulder. That sounds like a problem. Most people would enjoy that. Jack smiled slightly. Most people have never had scientists watching them because a creature decided not to chase them. Lyra looked at him carefully. You are not curious why it reacted that way. Jack tightened a connection on the tower. Of course I am. Then why do you act like this is normal? Jack looked at the ground for a moment. Because strange things become normal when you spend enough time around them. Lyra understood that answer more than she expected. She had spent her life studying alien worlds, but Jack had spent his life adapting to them. There was a difference between learning about survival and living it. Your records mentioned a rescue mission on an uninhabited moon, Lyra said. Jack became quiet. It was not uninhabited when we arrived. She waited. Jack continued working. That mission taught me something. What? Never assume a place is empty just because you do not understand what lives there. Lyra thought about the Karuan. The creature had been labeled a monster by countless civilizations. But Jack did not call it that. He called it a creature. A living thing trying to exist. That evening, something unexpected happened. The Karuan approached the station again. This time, it did not hide. The entire research team watched from inside as the massive creature stood near the lights of the facility. Everyone waited for Jack to react. He simply stepped outside. Jack, Lyra said through the communication system, her voice tense. Are you sure about this? Jack looked back toward the station. No, she was surprised. No, being sure is rare. He looked at the Karuan. You just make the best decision you can with what you know. Lyra watched as Jack slowly moved forward. Not as a hunter, not as a challenger, just as another living creature trying to understand the world around him. And for the first time, she realized the greatest mystery about humanity was not what they could destroy. It was what they chose not to destroy when they had the chance. Lyra Vey watched Jack Reynolds stand in the open field with the Karuan only a few yards away, and for the first time in her life, she realized she was witnessing something that had no scientific category. There were no measurements for it, no clear explanation, no simple answer hidden inside a database. A human and one of the galaxy's most misunderstood creatures were sharing the same space without fear or aggression. Inside the station, the research team remained silent. Nobody wanted to interrupt the moment. "Record everything," Lyra said quietly. "Every movement, every sound." Her assistant looked at her. "Doctor, what exactly are we expecting to learn?" Lyra watched Jack carefully. "I do not know yet." Outside, Jack stood still, allowing the Karuan to decide what happened next. He did not reach for equipment. He did not attempt to communicate. He simply waited. After several moments, the creature moved its head slightly, studying him. Jack looked back with the same calm expression he always carried. "You are curious too, huh?" he said softly. The translation system picked up his voice and sent it back to the station. Lyra listened closely. "He is talking to it," someone whispered. "Not exactly," Lyra replied. "He is talking near it." The difference mattered. Jack was not assuming the creature understood him. He was simply acknowledging its presence. Something about that seemed to change the atmosphere around them. The Karuan remained calm. Then, slowly, it turned away and walked back toward the valley. The research team released the breath they had been holding. Jack returned to the station a few minutes later and removed his gloves. Lyra met him at the entrance. "You were not afraid." Jack looked at her. "I was." She paused. "You were." "Of course." He placed his tools on the table. "The universe is full of things bigger than us. Pretending otherwise is how people make mistakes." Lyra studied him. "Then why did you go outside?" Jack looked at the floor for a moment. "Because it was already outside." That answer stayed with her. It was not bravery built from confidence. It was acceptance built from experience. Later that night, Lyra reviewed the restricted human records again. This time, she was not looking for weapons or technology. She was looking for patterns. She found them in rescue reports, exploration logs, and survival missions across dozens of worlds. Humans repeatedly entered places that other species considered impossible. They worked in extreme environments. They traveled to distant colonies. They helped people who were not even from their own world. The records showed something unusual. Humans were not naturally suited for every environment. They did not have the strongest bodies or the most advanced senses. They simply adapted faster than anyone expected. "They are not the strongest species," Lyra said quietly. Her assistant looked at the screen. "Then what makes them special?" Lyra looked outside at the dark landscape of Vesper 9. "They do not wait for the universe to become comfortable." The next morning, a message arrived from the Galactic Research Council requesting a full explanation of the Karuan incident. They wanted to know why the Predator had changed its behavior around a human. They wanted to know what humans possessed that other species did not. Lyra stared at the request for a long time before opening a new report. She began writing the first sentence carefully. Not about human strength. Not about human weapons. Not about human dominance. She wrote about something much harder to measure. Human restraint. Because the more she studied Jack Reynolds, the more she understood the truth. Humanity was not dangerous because it wanted to conquer everything around it. Humanity was dangerous because it had learned how much power it had, and still chose patience first. 3 weeks after the first encounter with the Karuan, Vesper 9 was no longer considered just a remote research location. It had become the place where the galaxy began asking a question it had never asked before. Not what humans could defeat, not what humans could build, but what kind of species chose restraint when it had every reason to prove itself. Dr. Lyra Vey stood before the Galactic Research Council through a live transmission, surrounded by representatives from hundreds of worlds. The room was filled with curiosity, doubt, and quiet concern. "You are saying the Karuan recognized the human as something familiar," one council member said. Lyra nodded. "Yes. And your conclusion is that humanity represents a unique survival pattern?" "My conclusion," Lyra replied, "is that we have misunderstood humanity." The council members exchanged uncertain looks. For centuries, civilizations had measured species by visible advantages. Stronger bodies, better technology, longer lifespans. Humans had none of those things compared to many advanced species. But Lyra continued, humans are not the strongest species I have studied. They are not the fastest. They are not the most naturally equipped for survival. She paused. They are simply the species that keeps adapting after others decide survival is impossible. Back on Vesper 9, Jack Reynolds listened to the broadcast while repairing a damaged section of the research station. He smiled slightly when he heard Lyra describing humanity. She makes us sound more impressive than we are, he said. Lyra, who was standing nearby, looked at him. Do you disagree? Jack tightened a small connection and looked out at the valley. Humans are not special because we never fail. Then why? She asked. Jack thought for a moment. Because we learn something from every failure. Lyra remembered the first time she saw him. A normal human worker on a forgotten planet. No dramatic entrance. No display of power. Just someone doing a job and paying attention. She realized that was the part everyone had missed. Humanity had never needed to appear unstoppable. Humanity had survived by understanding that nothing in the universe was guaranteed. That evening, Jack walked outside the station one final time before his assignment ended. The stars above Vesper 9 were brighter than Earth's night sky, and the silence felt almost peaceful. The Karuan appeared at the edge of the valley. It did not approach. Jack did not either. They simply watched each other from a distance. Lyra stood beside him. Do you think it understands you? She asked. Jack looked toward the creature. Probably not. Then why do you think it stays? Jack smiled faintly. Maybe it does not need to understand everything. Lyra looked at him. That sounds like something humans would say. Jack laughed quietly. Maybe that is the point. Years later, when the official records of Vesper 9 were taught across the galaxy, the story was never remembered because a human stood near a dangerous creature. It was remembered because one moment changed how civilizations viewed strength. The galaxy had spent centuries believing power meant control. Humanity showed them something different. Sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when not to use it. Sometimes survival was not about becoming the thing everyone feared. It was about remaining yourself after everything tried to change you. And that was the lesson the Karuan had understood long before anyone else. The most dangerous species in the universe was not the one that could destroy the most. It was the one that had the ability to do so, and still chose compassion first.